When a cocky young fighter taunts Steven Seagal and challenges him in front of everyone, the audience expects another fight. But what follows is not a fight, it's a lesson. In a ring stained with pride, Steven proves that uncontrolled strength is just noise and that calmness can be more lethal than any blow. Every movement of his is precise, every silence a warning. In seconds, the arrogant one falls and the world understands. Never underestimate someone who masters the soul before the fists. Because with Steven Seagal, the ring has a memory. The night was thick, heavy with smoke and sweat. The lights in the Iron Clue gym flickered like weary witnesses to too many fights and too many men, who confused strength with respect. Outside, the neighborhood breathed danger. A forgotten corner of the city where dreams were exchanged for cheap bets and shouts mingled with the distant roar of motorcycles. In the midst of that chaos, Steven Seagal entered silently. He had no bodyguards and no arrogance, just an impeccable black suit, and that cold gaze that could shatter any man's ego before he took a step. "I didn't come to fight, I came to teach." The murmur died away. The blows against the sandbag stopped. The younger boys, with bandages on their knuckles and rage in their eyes, stepped back when they recognized him. But one did not. Black Deaver Connors, a local fighter with invisible victory and defeat tattoos, crossed his arms in front of the veteran. His smile was that of a man who is not afraid to lose because he has not yet understood what it truly means to fall. "You're the famous Seagal," Black said, spitting a piece of gum onto the floor. "They say you used to know how to fight, but this isn't your movie." Steven didn't reply. He walked to the center of the ring. The sound of his footsteps on the canvas set a rhythm no one dared interrupt. He stepped up slowly without looking at the crowd that was already starting to record with their phones. When he took the referee's microphone, his voice was so low it forced everyone to fall silent to hear it. "Violence proves nothing," he said. "It only shows who hasn't yet learned to control it." Laughter. A couple of whistles. Black raised his arms as if inviting someone to a game. "So, old master, do you want me to show you how to fight now?" Steven looked at him for barely a second with that calm that only comes after too many internal battles. "I didn't come here to fight, kid, but if you attack me, don't expect me to defend myself like an actor." The crowd roared. The gym trainer, a man with a gray beard and a tired look, tried to intervene, but it was too late. Black launched himself furiously, young, seeking to bring down the idol that time, according to him, had forgotten. The first blow was swift, a spinning kick aimed for the jaw, but Steven didn't move. He waited, twisted his wrist, and in the blink of an eye, the young man's body was in midair. The sound of the impact echoed through the gym. Silence. Only the whir of the fluorescent lights. Black tried to get up, confused. His pride hurt more than his body. What the hell was that?" he growled. Steven took a step back without losing his composure. That was control. Something that isn't taught in gyms. It's learned by surviving. The spectators, who had expected blood, received a lesson. The air changed. Rage turned to respect. Even the toughest lowered their gaze, sensing that they had witnessed something that went beyond a fight. But Black understood. He got up staggering, roaring like a wounded animal, and launched himself again, this time with more force, with desperation. Steven dodged him effortlessly, redirected him, and the young man ended up against the ropes. One single movement, a clean twist, and Black was immobilized, his arm trapped with surgical precision. Steven leaned over and whispered something no one else heard. "The ring doesn't measure strength, it measures soul." When he released him, the boy fell to his knees. There was no hatred in his eyes, only belated understanding. The crowd erupted in applause, but Steven didn't accept it. He stepped out of the ring, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the door as if nothing had happened. Outside, the rain was beginning to fall, washing away the dust and arrogance of the place. The coach caught up with him at the exit. "You didn't have to do it, Steven. That kid is impulsive, but he's not a bad guy." "I know," the coach replied, watching the neon lights reflect in the puddles. "But sometimes you have to break pride before pride breaks them." The camera, imaginary but alive, slowly pulls back. The rain continues to fall, the murmurs of the gym fade. In the distance, Black gets up, looks at his trembling hands, and for the first time he understands that the real fight hasn't even begun yet. If you don't want to miss our content, hit the like button and subscribe below. Also, turn on notifications and tell us where you're listening from. We appreciate your support. Dawn fell over the city with a metallic sheen. The streets were damp, reflecting dying neon lights and distant sirens. In the Iron District, news traveled faster than the wind. Steven Seagal humiliated a young fighter at the Iron Cloud gym. The videos had gone viral before the sun had even finished rising. Every social media platform, every local news site repeated the same scene. The old master taking down the arrogant one in a single move. But no one showed what came next. The look of understanding, the silence, the lesson. The world preferred spectacle to meaning. Black Connors woke up late, his body aching and his pride shattered. In his small apartment, the walls seemed to mock him with every new notification. Mocking messages, memes, montages. Even his coach had left him a voicemail. Kid, when you're ready to learn, come back. If not, keep living in your own noise. The young man turned off his phone, looked at himself in the mirror. The bruises on his face didn't hurt as much as the truth. He hadn't lost to an old man, he had lost to himself. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Steven Seagal was in his personal dojo, a quiet place filled with aged wood, incense, and photographs of old masters. He moved his hands with pinpoint precision, practicing kata that looked like slow dances of the wind. Every gesture had purpose, every breath weight. A door opened. It was Detective Miles Rourke, an old friend from the days when Steven trained officers for the police. "I saw the thing at the gym," he said, dropping a unclear, possibly a drink on the table. "You're in fashion again." Steven didn't even stop. Fashion fades. Discipline doesn't. Rourke smiled wearily. "Well, discipline or not, someone isn't happy with what you did. That kid Black has a new promoter, a guy named Kane. Dalton. He's a fighter, rich, dirty, and hungry for fame. He's using the video to announce a public challenge. He wants to see you in the ring again at an official event." Steven turned slowly. His eyes showed no surprise, only resignation. "Violence sells, and now they think I'm part of the show. Maybe you should ignore him. If I ignore him, I'll teach the kid that noise wins over silence, and I can't allow that." Rose stared. She knew that calm hid fire. "So are you going to accept?" Steven was silent for a few seconds. Then he nodded. "Not for me, for him." Days later, the Iron Clue gym was unrecognizable. Lights, cameras, reporters, a huge poster. The Master versus the Challenger. Justice in the ring. Black stood there with a hardened face, but his eyes betrayed confusion. He knew they were using him. Ken Dalton, his new promoter, circled like a shark. "Listen, kid," Ken said, placing a heavy hand on his shoulder. "It's not about respect, it's about a virality. This old man humiliated you, now you take him down. What matters is the audience." "I just want to fight clean," Black replied. "Clean doesn't pay the bills, son." Ken smiled, showing teeth too white to be honest. The crowd began to fill the place. R, who was among them, watching everything from the stands, knew something smelled fishy. Too many cameras, too many contracts. There was a tension in the air that didn't belong in a simple fight. Steven appeared on time. He was dressed the same. Black suit, no gloves, no arrogance. He walked to the ring to a confused ovation. Some hailed him as a legend, others wanted to see him fall, but he didn't listen. He only saw the kid and in his eyes an opportunity. The referee raised his hand. "Simple rules. 2 rounds. No weapons, no cheating." Dalton smiled from his chair. "Yeah, right, no cheating," he whispered. The bell rang. Black advanced this time without arrogance. His movements were precise, disciplined, almost humble. Steven blocked gently, guiding the young man's energy instead of resisting it. Every blow he didn't throw spoke volumes. He was a master correcting, not punishing. The confused audience fell silent. It wasn't a fight, it was a lesson. Until the blow landed. From the edge of the ring, Can threw something, a white powder barely visible, straight into Steven's eyes. The master covered himself too late. Blinded, he stumbled backward. The audience screamed. The referee hesitated. Black didn't understand what was happening. He didn't scream. That wasn't part of the deal. Can roared from outside. "Finish the fight now, or forget about your career." The young man hesitated, looked at Steven staggering, and something inside him broke. He couldn't do it. Not like this. But Steven, even blinded, knew what was happening. His movements became instinctive, guided by sound and air. He blocked an attack he never saw coming, spun around, and in one fluid motion took the boy down again, this time with a delicate touch. He caught him before he hit the floor. The crowd erupted. The referee rushed to intervene. Black was left on his knees, gasping for breath. "I didn't want this," he whispered. "He made me." Steven, still with his eyes closed, spoke in a grave voice. "No one can force you to betray your honor. Only you decide that." Security guards ran toward Kane, who was trying to escape through the crowd. Rourke was the first to reach him. "Dirty play," Dalton said as he handcuffed him. But today the old man taught you a lesson too. The camera lingered on Steven, his vision blurred, taking a deep breath. A drop of sweat fell onto the canvas. Respect isn't earned in the ring, he murmured. It's earned by facing your own darkness. The crowd, once hungry for spectacle, now watched him in silence. The man who didn't know how to handle the ring had just demonstrated that true control isn't in the fists, but in the spirit. The rain returned that night relentlessly, as if the city were trying to wash away its own corruption. The posters advertising Steven Seagal's fight were dissolving on the damp walls of Iron District, leaving trails of ink that looked like black tears. The public had already forgotten. The videos had spread across the internet and social media was moving on to its next scandal. But some men didn't forget so easily. In an abandoned building by the train tracks, Connalton slammed his fist on his desk in fury. News reports covered his arrest and release on bail. Contracts had been broken. Sponsors had vanished, all because of a man who hadn't even wanted to fight. That damn monk in a suit, he growled, ruined me with one knockdown. In the darkness, a figure moved through the shadows. Maybe it wasn't him who ruined you, Can, a deep voice said. Maybe it was you playing with honor like it was money. Dalton turned. The man speaking was Marcus Bile, head of an underground fight network. A guy who didn't believe in rules, only in profit. I have a proposition, Bile continued. The old master humiliated you, but he also gave you something valuable. Pay attention, everyone is watching. If we eliminate him in the right ring, the one we control, your downfall becomes a spectacle and a gain. Dalton hesitated. And if he refuses to fight again? Bailey smiled. Every man has a weakness. Find out what his is. Miles away, Steven Seagal was in his dojo repairing an old Japanese katana. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of metal scraping against the whetstone. Beside him, Black Connors watched silently, still ashamed. Master, I still don't understand why you helped me, he finally said. Steven didn't look up. Because I saw in you what I once was. Arrogance, rage, a hunger to prove something. All of that can be redirected if there is still honor. Black nodded. He had spent the last few weeks training under his guidance. He no longer sought applause but balance, yet something inside him remained restless. Not everyone understands honor, Master. There are men who only understand power. That's why real power must remain invisible, Steven replied. It's only used when necessary. Before he could continue, the sound of a motorcycle broke the calm. R appeared in the doorway, dripping wet, an envelope in his hand. We have a problem, he said bluntly. The guy from the gym, Can Dalton, was released and hasn't wasted any time. He opened the envelope. Inside were photographs. Steven, Black, the dojo, even the old master's house. All taken from a distance. They're being watched, Rourke added. And there are more rumors of a new underground tournament. $1 million bets, fighters disappearing. Someone wants to use your name. Steven. They're calling it the rematch of the century. Steven looked at the photos without visible emotion. Then I'll go, he said finally. Black was startled. He's going to accept. That's a trap. I know, the master replied, putting the envelope in his jacket. But some traps must be stepped on carefully to know who sets them. That night, in the tunnels under the city, Marcus Bile's network, he was preparing for the event. An improvised ring surrounded by luxury cars, mobsters, and clandestine cameras. The atmosphere was thick with smoke, betting, and the metallic smell of violence. Can Dalton was there, his face tense, a drink in his hand. And if he doesn't show up, he asked. He'll show up, Bailey replied, lighting a cigarette. Men like him can't ignore injustice. It's their downfall. The clock struck midnight, and then the impossible happened. The tunnel lights flickered, and from the gloom emerged the figure of Steven Seagal, dressed in black, walking slowly through the crowd. He had no escort or equipment, only his serenity. The illegal crowd roared. Bailey smiled. Let the show begin. The first opponent entered the ring, a Russian giant with scars like maps of lost wars. His arms were the size of columns, and each step made the ground tremble. Dalton watched from his box, expecting to see blood, but Steven didn't move with fear or haste. The Russian threw a direct punch to the chest. The maestro spun, deflected it. The force of the opponent brought him down with a fluid, almost invisible movement. The body fell like a log. Silence. Another opponent entered, then another and another. Each one fell without Steven raising his voice or changing his expression. It was a deadly dance, clean, serene. The spectators stopped applauding. Some even stepped back as if they understood they weren't watching a man, but a contained storm. Dance frowned. "This can't go on," he whispered to Dalton. "Activate the plan." Dalton nodded, pressing a button on his watch. From the shadows, a fourth rival appeared, but this was no ordinary fighter. He was a professional assassin brought from Eastern Europe, an expert in fights to the death. Metal rings with hidden blades gleamed on his hands. Rourke, hidden among the crowd, saw the glint of the weapon and shouted, "Steven, watch out!" But the blow was coming. The assassin attacked with cat-like speed. Steven dodged, but a red line crossed his cheek. Blood trickled slowly, mingling with sweat. The crowd roared again, believing they had finally caught him. Steven took a deep breath, closed his eyes. When he opened them, his gaze was that of a man who had lived through too many wars. With a fluid movement, he caught the attacker's arm, spun around, and the sound of bone breaking sliced through the air. The assassin fell to his knees. Steven caught him before he hit the ground. "Guns are for the weak," he said quietly. "I only use what can't be taken away, control." Bailey rose, furious. "This is over," he shouted. But before he could escape, sirens wailed. Rourke pulled out his badge. "Operation complete. Illegal fighting, trafficking, and fraud. Can Marcus, all on record." The crowd scattered in chaos. Steven stood motionless in the ring as the police filled the tunnel. Rain began to seep through cracks in the ceiling, falling on his face. Rourke approached. "You knew they were coming, didn't you?" "I didn't come to win," Steven said. "I came to close the circle." The detective nodded. In the distance, Blackie watched, impressed, finally understanding the lesson his teacher always repeated. The real fight isn't against others, but against the part of you that still wants to fight. The camera rises, the rain falls harder, and in the metallic echo of the tunnel, Steven's last words mingle with the thunder. "Justice doesn't need witnesses, only truth." The storm had ended, but the city was still soaked. The streets shone like broken mirrors, and the echo of sirens still vibrated in the alleyways. On local television, news reports showed images of the operation in the tunnels, dozens of arrests, including Can Dalton and Marcus Bale. But while the world talked of scandal and corruption, Steven Seagal preferred silence. His dojo was empty. The lit candles cast shadows that danced across the walls. Steven sat before the altar where old photos of his teachers rested. The wound on his cheek had healed, but not the restlessness that dwelled within him. He had defeated the visible enemy. Yes, but the real one, the fight had barely begun. A door opened. It was Black, a folded newspaper tucked under his arm. "They're saying you planned everything, Master," he said bitterly. That the fight was staged to humiliate Khan and gain fame. Steven didn't look up. The world can't tell the difference between truth and spectacle. It just looks for a scapegoat to entertain it. Black placed the newspaper on the table. "They're going to use your name to smear him. They're talking about opening an investigation against you for participating in illegal events." "Let them talk," the master replied, calmly serving him. "Justice has its own rhythm, even if the noise tries to bury it." The young man looked at him, puzzled. "And you're just going to stay put?" Steven looked at him for the first time with that serenity that was both comforting and frightening. "There's no peace without inner war, but I won't fight with words. There's something darker moving behind all this, and it's not Can Dalton." In a downtown skyscraper, a man observed the city from his office. He had white hair, skin marked by time, and a scar across his left eye. His name was Victor Corin, a former intelligence officer turned businessman. He had once mentored Steven until their paths diverged. At a table across from him, an assistant was showing him a freeze-frame video. Steven taking down the wrestlers in the tunnel. "It's fascinating," Corin said. "Decades without stepping into a ring, and he still moves like a ghost." "What do we do with him?" the assistant asked. Corin smiled, a slow, cold gesture. "Nothing yet. Old warriors don't die with age. They die forgetting why they fought. And this one hasn't forgotten yet." He turned off the monitor. "But if he decides to interfere in my business, then I'll teach him again what it's like to lose." That night, R visited Steven. He brought bad news and wore dark circles under his eyes. "The media is putting pressure on. The prosecutor wants to see you tomorrow. They say you were part of the dance betting system, that your appearance in the ring was arranged." Steven put his tea down on the table. "And you believe that, Roar?" he sighed. "No, but there's proof. That someone fabricated. Documents, transfers, fake recordings. It's a trap, Steven. Someone wants to see you destroyed and has enough money to make it happen. The teacher walked to the window. Outside, the rain had returned, fine and steady. So they're not after my reputation, they're after my reaction. RK looked at him confused. What are you going to do? Wait, he replied. The shadow always grows impatient before the light. Meanwhile, in an underground gym in the north of the city, a group of men trained under the watchful eye of Victor Koren. They were former soldiers, turned into elite fighters molded with one purpose: to eliminate Steven Seagal if he interfered again. Koren walked among them with a steel cane. Many believe that strength comes from muscle, he said. But true strength comes from obedience. Steven forgot that, which is why he fell. And you will be his reminder. Not one of the men, a tattooed colossus named Red, asked, "Why not just finish him off?" Koren smiled. Because myths are not destroyed with bullets, they are corrupted from within. The next morning, Steven appeared before the prosecutor. The cameras were waiting for him like vultures. Reporters shouted his name, throwing out questions that no one expected him to answer. It is true that he was paid to participate in illegal fights. He has a relationship with Marcus Bale. He is going to retire for good. Steven didn't say a word. He entered the building with calm steps. Black and R watched from the sidewalk. I can't believe how they're crucifying him for doing the right thing, Black murmured. That's how the city works, Yark replied. It rewards noise, it punishes silence. Hours later, when Steven came out, his face remained impassive. What did they say? Blake asked. They will continue investigating, he replied. But what they're really looking for isn't in the documents, it's in me. Ark frowned. In you. Someone wants to provoke me into returning to the ring, to fight outside the law, and this time without witnesses. Ark looked at him in alarm. Do you have any idea who? Steven nodded slowly. Yes. Someone who once taught me everything and then betrayed me. The name floated in the air like a ghost. Victor Koren. That night, Black was training alone in the dojo. The movement Steven had taught her flowed with precision, but her mind was elsewhere. Fear haunted him. Suddenly he heard a noise outside, a sharp bang, then another. When he went outside, he saw the door smashed and an envelope on the floor. Inside, a photograph. Steven years ago with a man with an icy gaze, Koren. On the reverse, a handwritten phrase. Every master creates his shadow, and every shadow eventually turns against him. The sound of a motorcycle driving away broke the silence. Black gripped the paper angrily. He knew that his master's past had just returned, and that this time the ring would not be made of canvas but of fire. The camera rises, showing the city in the rain. In a distant building, Koren observes from her window a glass of wine in her hand. Come to me, old friend, he murmurs. This time there will be no audience, only the ending you yourself created. The camera zooms in on Steven's eyes, meditating in front of the candles, while his voice, Enov, whispers. The most dangerous enemy is not the one who seeks your death, but the one who knows your peace. Dawn arrived gray and thick, as if the sky refused to show light over the city. The clouds carried the weight of something inevitable. In the dojo, Steven Seagal moved silently, performing slow and precise catapults. Every breath was an internal battle. He didn't train to win, he trained to remember who he was. The sound of footsteps pulled him from his meditation. It was Ark with a serious face. We have a problem. Black has not returned since last night. Steven stopped moving. His gaze hardened. You did leave a trace on their phone, but it was turned off hours ago. The last signal was near the old pier, the one that is in ruins. The teacher nodded without saying a word. He walked to the back closet and took out an old black jacket with cracked leather. Inside his pocket, he kept a wooden rosary and a white handkerchief stained with old blood. He looked at them for a moment and then put them away again. The past decided to return, he murmured. It's time to answer him. On the dock, the wind blew with the smell of metal and salt. The rusted containers were stacked like anonymous graves. Inside one of them, Blackie was tied to a chair. In front of him, Victor Koren watched an old recording projected on the wall, a video from 20 years ago where he and Steven trained together in a military dojo. In the film, the two moved like dancing shadows. One was control, the other power. Koren turned off the projector. Do you know why I chose him and not me? He asked, approaching the young man. Because they believed that balance was more valuable than victory. He leaned forward with a cruel smile. But peace doesn't feed empires, kid. Yes, fear. Black, his face swollen and his voice cracking, could barely manage to say, You don't know him like I do. He's not fighting for pride, he's fighting to avoid it. Corin looked at him with a mixture of pity and contempt, and that's why he'll lose again. Hours later, Steven arrived at the dock. Each step echoed among the empty structures. The camera followed her slow, tense walk with the sound of the wind hitting the metal. From the shadows, a voice greeted him. "You're late, old friend." Corin appeared dressed in black, leaning on his steel cane. Beside him, 2 armed men were holding Black down. Steven watched him without blinking. "If you wanted to see me, you just had to ask." Corin smiled ironically. "You were always like that, so confident, so predictable. Did you think that by hiding in the calm, you would get rid of what you were?" The teacher took another step closer. "I didn't hide. I walked away so I wouldn't become what you chose to be." Corin raised his staff and pointed it at him. "I chose to survive, and to do that you have to get your hands dirty." The wind intensified, carrying dust and papers. Black shouted, "Master, don't do it. It's a trap." But Steven wasn't listening. His gaze was fixed on Corin. "If you seek my surrender, you won't get it. But if you seek my soul, you'll have to earn it." Corin let out a laugh, then let the old days breathe again. With a gesture, he ordered his men to attack. The first 2 advanced with knives. Steven spun, dodging the first slash with a fluid movement. He struck the attacker's arm with a flick of the wrist, disarming him. The second attacked him from behind, but Steven took him down with a sharp, precise sweep. The sound of the impact echoed off the metal structure. Corin watched, motionless. "Nothing has changed," he whispered. "You still dance between blows in silence." Steven freed Black and shoved him toward a container. "Run, don't look back." Black hesitated. "And you?" "The ring is mine, kid, and it's already started." Black ran into the shadows while Corin and Steven faced off. The old general's cane whistled through the air, striking the master's forearms. Each blow was a memory, each defense a silent confession. The years hadn't dulled their technique. Both moved with surgical precision, without hatred but with an unbearable moral weight. Corin twisted the cane and pointed it at Steven's neck. "Remember that day in Kabul? You said you would never strike in revenge." He shoved him back hard. "And now do you still believe that?" Steven took a deep breath, blood trickling from his brow. "Yes, but I also learned that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's a choice." Corin roared and threw a downward blow. Steven dodged it, caught the cane in the middle and snapped it in 2 with a sharp twist. Half flew through the air, landing beside the enemy's feet. "So choose, Victor," he said firmly. "Stop or it ends here." The former officer glared at him, barely contained. Too late for that. He drew. The weapon was hidden in his coat, but before he could aim, Steven disarmed him with a key that resulted in a clean takedown. The gun fell into the water. Both stood, breathing heavily, wet from the drizzle. The camera slowly panted, capturing the contrast between their faces. The man who wanted to rule the world and the one who only wanted peace. "You don't understand, Steven," Corin gasped. "This city is built on control. If you don't have it, it's taken from you." "Control isn't imposed," the teacher replied. "It's taught." Corin smiled bitterly. "Then show me how to lose." He lunged with one last punch. Steven met it, twisted his body, and took him down with perfect precision. Corin fell backward to the ground, the air escaping his chest. Silence, only rain. Steven bent over him without hatred. "You weren't my enemy, Victor. You were just my shattered mirror." He laid his jacket over the motionless body and walked away toward the pier exit. He emerged from the darkness, wounded but alive. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice trembling. Steven gazed at the horizon. "Nothing ends. It only changes form." They walked together toward dawn, the sea in the background and the city lights beginning to twinkle. The camera pulls back and the teacher's grave voice closes the scene. The ring was never about ropes or glory, it was about soul. And in that space, no one wins, no one loses, only learns. Night fell upon the city like a damp curtain. Neon lights flickered in the puddles, reflecting a world that seemed weary of itself. The pier was empty. Only the echo of the previous fight lingered among the steel beams like a sigh trapped in time. Steven Seagal walked alone, his silhouette outlined by the rain. The water washed the blood from his hands, but not the weight he carried on his shoulders. He had won, though he didn't feel like a victor. Victor Corin's body had been handed over to the authorities without glory or hatred, only with respect. He had been a teacher, a rival, a brother, and now it was memory. In the dojo, the candles burned lower than ever. Black was slowly and silently cleaning the floor. When Steven entered, the young man looked at him with teary eyes. "He shouldn't have faced it alone," he said in a restrained voice. "We could have done it together." Steven hung his coat on the rack. The water dripped onto the tatami, marking the silence between them. Some fights aren't meant to be shared, Black. Not because they're big, but because they're ours. The young man clenched his fists. So what did we learn? That peace cost blood. The master approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. No, son. We learned that violence always tries to disguise itself as justice. But true justice doesn't need noise, only presence. Days later, the newspapers reported on the dismantling of an underground network of illegal betting and fighting. Steven Seagal's name didn't appear anywhere. It was as if he had never existed, and in a way he preferred it that way. R, who went to look for him one afternoon, found him sitting by the river with a cup of hot tea between his hands. You disappeared, he told him. Nobody knows where you are. The police closed the case, but there are still those who are looking for you. Steven looked at him calmly. Let them look for me. He who chases shadows ends up losing the sun. R lit a cigarette. He observed him for a moment. You know, I don't understand how you can be so calm after everything that happened. The master smiled slightly because I understood something. It's not about winning the ring, but about leaving it without hatred. R looked at him respectfully, nodding slowly. You always speak as if each word weighs more than a bullet. Because a bullet is lost, Steven replied. But the word remains. That night he returned to the dojo. There were no students, no audience, only silence. He lit one last candle and placed the photograph of his old master in front of it. The circle closed. Sensei whispered, but not as he expected. He left the rosary on the altar and took a deep breath. The wind came in through the window, extinguishing the flame. For an instant, the dojo was in complete darkness. In the morning next, Black looked for it, but only found a folded note on the tatami. It read, When the noise of the world calls you to fight, listen first to your breathing. If it continues, stay calm. Don't respond. If it shakes, you still have something to learn. Steven, the young man, looked up. The dojo was empty, but on the floor there were still wet footprints leading away towards the door. He ran out, looking in all directions, but the teacher was no longer there. Only the rain fell softly, steadily, like a wordless farewell. Somewhere in the city, a train was moving along the industrial tracks. In one of the carriages, Steven watched the gray landscape go by. She was carrying a small bag, nothing more. Her gaze was serene yet profound, as if she already knew the end of all wars. A deep, measured, and resonant voice filled the scene. They say that the warrior never rests, that his soul is condemned to seek enemies even in peace. But the true warrior does not seek to win. He seeks to understand why he continues to fight. The camera slowly rises, showing the city disappearing into the fog. The train moves away, its whistle echoing like a distant reverberation of everything that has been experienced. A final ray of light breaks through the clouds, and over the sound of the wind, Steven's final voice is heard. The ring is not a place, it is the moment when you decide who you are. And when you know that, you no longer need to fight.